Have you ever felt like you were in a desert season? Maybe you're in that season right now, wondering if things will ever get better, or if you'll end up living the rest of your life in the desert. Maybe you wonder why God is allowing this hard circumstance and feel invisible or forgotten. I've had numerous desert seasons in my life, not knowing if I would make it through to the other side. I've learned, however, that the desert isn't where God wants us to stay. He may need to take us there for a while, but his hope is for us to know and love him better. He has a purpose for our pain. We may or may not understand why, but through it, he teaches us to trust him more. Today, I want to share a few of my desert stories and hope it will bring you to a better understanding of how much he loves you. Welcome to the Kitchen Table series of the Building Strong Homes podcast, where faith meets family in the most practical and powerful ways. I'm your host, Carol Roper, wife, mom, and former home designer. I used to spend my days drafting floor plans and designing details, but now I help wives and moms design lives rooted in God's Word. These short episodes are like a cozy chat over coffee at my kitchen table. You may not be sitting here physically, but I hope you'll feel like you're right across from me, listening in as we talk about what it means to build a home that stands strong, not just structurally, but spiritually. This podcast is for women who are done with survival mode. You're craving clarity, you're longing for purpose, and you're ready to build something that lasts. So pull up a chair, friend. Let's talk about faith, family, and the kind of legacy that echoes through generations. In my last kitchen table episode, I shared about Moses sending the spies into the promised land and how the people didn't trust God enough to lead them safely there. So they ended up wandering in the desert wilderness for 40 more years as punishment for their complaining and disobedience. Today, I want to share something that never occurred to me before until I was listening to that podcast I mentioned in the previous episode about the plans God has for us and our decision to trust Him. This is my story about my desert season, not knowing if God had plans to deliver me from one of the hardest times of my life. As I've mentioned before, I celebrated my 60th birthday this past June. That's a hard number to swallow, especially since in my mind I still think I'm in my 30s. When you've lived 6 decades, you don't have much choice but to have lived through some stuff, some life-changing, difficult stuff. When I was in my mid-20s, my sister-in-law and I owned a floral shop that was a financial disaster. During that time, my husband and I had started trying to have a family. We'd probably been trying for over a year when we had a serious conversation while lying in bed one night. I was so distraught over how much money we were losing in the shop, and we were discussing what to do. John suggested we just sell the business and get out. But what will I do if we sell it? I don't want to go back to work for an architect, I said. You can stay home, John said. I think we'll be okay. Even though he was trying to be supportive, the words struck my heart so hard I let out a cry of grief. How could I stay home and do nothing? We don't have children. We may never have children. That is not an option for me. That night, I felt like I was wrestling with God, not knowing what our future held. Heartbreak and despair defined my life at that point. I was losing hope for both the business and my barren womb. One thing I've learned in my lifetime is that the hardest part of suffering is the not knowing. If you have a strategy, a hope, and a vision, you can believe this won't last forever. I was losing hope and didn't know if my barrenness would last forever, and it was killing my soul. Years later, we sold the flower shop, and God blessed us with 2 beautiful children. 2 years of infertility finally led to the positive test we'd been longing for, and we brought home our beautiful baby daughter, Elise, 9 months later. When she was about a year old, we started trying to conceive again, not knowing how long it would take this time. Thankfully, it was only 14 months before I saw the double lines of a pregnancy test, and 9 months later, we welcomed our sweet little boy, Jacob, into the family. But I still felt our family was incomplete and started thinking about having a third child. A few months after Jacob was born, though, I began struggling physically and mentally, suffering with pain I'd never experienced and struggling to do the most basic tasks. I went to my family doctor, and after a thorough exam, he diagnosed me with fibromyalgia. He explained what it was, since I'd never heard of it before. "So, how long will it last?" I asked innocently. "Forever," he said grimly. "There's no cure." "I was wanting to try for a third child," I said. "Will this affect my chances of having another child?" "Carol, I wouldn't recommend it. It would be hard on your body, and you'd have a difficult time trying to keep up with 3 children. I think 2 is probably best." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. He gave me a couple of prescriptions to help with the pain and depression and made a few suggestions on how to have a better quality of life, and that was it. I left his office in a daze, but I vividly remember sitting in my car thinking, "I'm 31 years old. I'm going to have to live like this for the rest of my life." But the medicine helped, and I started taking better care of myself, and life went on. I figured out how to manage the pain and depression pretty well on most days. Until about 2 years later, I hit a wall I couldn't get over and was finally diagnosed with clinical depression. I'd never really understood what depression was. I thought it was just being sad all the time. It's so much more than that. I felt like I was always on the edge of a dark, bottomless pit, trying to claw my way out at any given moment. During one dark night, I felt like I'd met Satan himself. The fear enveloped me like a casket. My soul was suffocating. There were mornings I could barely pull myself out of bed. I remember one particular time when my daughter was turning 5, and I'd planned a dress-up birthday party at our house. I thought I'd clean the house on Friday for the party on Saturday. But when Friday came, I literally could not get out of bed. I lay there and cried, desperately asking God what to do. Thankfully, he brought to mind a friend at church who occasionally cleaned houses. I called her, and she was able to come that day and help me out. During this time, there were many days like this. In despair, I truly believed I would end up in a mental institution and wouldn't be able to raise my kids. Fear became an ever-present, unwanted companion in my everyday life. I didn't believe even God could rescue me from the pain of depression. Even though suicide wasn't a serious option in my mind, I just wanted the pain to stop. I thought if I died, I wouldn't have to suffer anymore. But I didn't want to leave my loved ones. So I started praying earnestly for Jesus' return. Just like the Israelites, I only saw the fear and giant black hole of depression before me. I forgot about the goodness of God. My trust waned as I gave in to despair. Recently, listening to that podcast I mentioned earlier, I realized that God never planned on having his people wander aimlessly in the desert for 40 years until everyone over the age of 20 died, except for Joshua and Caleb. God had wonderful things in store for them. He was going to fight for them, just like he did in Egypt, just like he did when he parted the Red Sea and buried the Egyptian army underwater, just like he did when he provided food as manna from heaven. But they didn't trust his plan. They also forgot about the goodness of God. As I was thinking about their ungratefulness, I understood and realized they were without the basic necessities they were used to being given and were worried about survival. I know that made them fearful. After all, they wouldn't last long without food and water. But God was teaching them how to trust him by providing for their every need. But then a realization struck me hard. The desert season was only supposed to be a short period of time. A quick Google search showed it could have been an 11-day journey to the Promised Land. However, God had some things to teach them about Himself since they'd lived as slaves for so long. He needed them to understand who He is and gave them commandments and laws about how to live if they were going to be a successful nation who honored God above all else. They'd never really taken care of themselves before. They were fed and clothed so that they could do the work the Egyptians required of them, but they had no freedom, no say in anything. When God met Moses on Mount Sinai, He gave Moses the 10 Commandments and plans for building the tabernacle and everything in it. It took them about 6 months to complete God's plan. By the way, I'm leaving out a lot of the story here, but you can go to the book of Exodus to find all of the details. Another Google search shows that it took 13 months for the Israelites to make it to the Promised Land. Still not too bad considering they had at least 2 million people and built a tabernacle and everything to go in it while they were in the wilderness. But once God brought them to the edge of the Promised Land, they didn't believe He would keep His promises. Even though when Moses was on Mount Sinai longer than they anticipated, and the people turned from God and had Aaron create an idol because they believed they no longer had a God, even though they complained about the manna and Moses and all of the inconveniences they had to face, God was still going to deliver them to the Promised Land. But the Israelites, after all God had done for them, after all He'd put up with, didn't trust Him to get them to the other side. God had a good plan, and they were bound and determined not to follow it. Yes, they'd had to face the reality of no food or water, along with the dangers of the desert, but each time they asked for help, God provided for their every need. The days and weeks of having to trust God for those needs because they couldn't provide for themselves were only supposed to last 13 months. Because they had no land to farm, or animals to provide food for them, or streams to provide water, God was saying, I am enough. But they didn't believe it. And so God had to turn them away from the Promised Land. It wasn't supposed to be a journey of 40 years, only a little over 1 year. The suffering and reliance on God for everything was only meant to be for a short period of time in the grand scheme of things. But because they still didn't trust Him after 13 months of Him showing up every single day, providing manna from heaven and water from rocks, they missed the blessing. It wasn't supposed to be that way. God wanted more and better for them, but their lack of belief caused them to have to trust Him for every crumb of food and every drop of water as they wandered through the desert for the next 40 years. Turning back to my own desert season of depression, I didn't know what to do while on the edge of that deep pit. But the Holy Spirit led me to start reading through my Bible every day. When I got to the book of Psalms, it was like a balm to my soul. But when I read Psalms 40, verses 1 through 3, I felt a sudden kinship with King David and was given hope. It says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in Him. I clung to the promise that God would rescue me from that pit and put a new song in my mouth. He met me through His word and provided the sustenance I needed to get me through every day, even though they were very difficult days. Mercifully, I eventually found a wonderful counselor who helped me deal with some unknown bitterness I was holding in my heart that was the root of my depression. Going through the hard work of forgiveness, reading my Bible, and leaning on God through prayer, I finally found healing from my depression. I'd suffered in agony for about a year. Funny, that's about the same amount of time the Israelites were supposed to be in the desert. I'll never forget the moment I felt free from the chains of depression that had bound me in misery for so long. I was headed to church one Sunday evening as the sun was setting. When I got to the end of my road, I stopped and looked to my left for oncoming traffic when I saw the most beautiful and glorious sunset ever. At that exact moment when I turned my head, a song on the radio burst out with the chorus, "You are God, bright and morning star." And I felt God speak to my soul and say, "You are healed. Your long fight in the deep darkness is over." I cried because I knew it was true. My long season in the wilderness was over, and I'd grown closer to God than I'd ever imagined. He was inviting me into his promised land of abundant living, and I was so happy to follow him in. I've honestly never been the same since that day. I had to trust God for my most basic needs to get me through the darkest time of my life. And because I did, I now know him better than I ever could have without having had that experience. I don't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It showed me how trustworthy my God really is, and that he does have our best interests at heart. His plans are better than anything I could want or wish for. My life hasn't been all rainbows and roses since that day. I sometimes still struggle a little with depression, and my body still deals with the pain of fibromyalgia, but nothing to the degree I'd experienced earlier in life. Neither were the death sentence, however, that I'd feared. Now, when I lean into God and give him my fears, he reminds me of his faithfulness in the past. Sometimes I still get mad and wrestle with his will, but ultimately I know his plan is best. He doesn't want to leave us in the desert. So, once again, I'll follow him into his best plan. If you're walking through a desert season right now, friend, take heart. It doesn't have to last forever. God hasn't forgotten you. The desert isn't where he plans to leave us. It's where he shapes us, just like he did for the Israelites, just like he's done in my own story. He'll meet you right there. He'll provide, he'll guide, and in his timing, he'll lead you into your own promised land. Today's blueprint tip: start a trust journal. Each time you see God answer a prayer or provide in an unexpected way, write it down. Then, when you find yourself in another hard season, you'll have a record of his faithfulness to remind you that he's still at work, even when you can't see it. If this episode encouraged you, would you please leave a rating and a review and maybe share it? Your reviews are a gift to me, and I read every one. And now, if I read your review on an episode, you can win a free t-shirt. All you have to do is fill out the form in the link in the show notes to let me know, and I'll get in touch if I share it. So go to your Apple Podcast app now to leave a review. And I'm so excited to tell you that I've redesigned my website with new features, links, and freebies. There's also a special bonus episode you can only hear by going to my website and clicking the Open Your Blueprint link on the homepage. Click the link below in the show notes, and it will take you there. Until next time, keep laying those bricks of truth, hope, and love, because strong homes and strong hearts are built on remembering the God who never fails. Don't give up, especially when it's hard to trust God. Don't give in, and keep building strong, because you're building something that matters. Thanks so much for listening.